Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to map out one of the most critical pathways in the human body, the stress response. We're going to follow the entire chain reaction from a single stressful thought all the way down to the physical damage that can actually lead to disease.
So let's kick things off with the big question for this whole explainer. How can a feeling, a deadline, a fight, a constant worry, literally turn into a physical disease? How does the psychological become physiological? Let's trace that journey step by step. And here's our roadmap. First, we'll get the basics down. What even is the stress response? Then we'll dive into that acute alarm stage, the body's emergency system. After that, we'll look at what happens when that alarm just gets stuck in the on position, which leads to chronic stress. Then we'll connect that overload directly to disease. And finally, we'll wrap up with how we can build resilience and, learn to turn the system off. Okay, let's jump right into this first section. Before we can really get how the system breaks down, we need a super clear picture of how it's supposed to work. This is our foundation. So the original framework for this whole idea came from a researcher named Hans Selye. He saw the body's response to long-term stress happening in 3 phases. First, you've got that initial shock, the alarm. If the stress keeps going, the body rallies its defenses and enters the resistance phase. But you can't fight forever, right? Eventually, if that stressor doesn't let up, you hit exhaustion. That's where your resources are just tapped out and you become vulnerable to getting sick.
Now, this is a really crucial update in how we think about this. The old idea was something called homeostasis, basically thinking the body was like a thermostat, always trying to get back to one single rigid set point. The new, much more accurate view is allostasis. This means your body finds stability through change. And here's the key difference. Your brain isn't just reacting to stress, it's constantly predicting what you're going to need and adjusting your heart rate, your hormones, and everything else in advance. It's a predictive system, not just a reactive one. Super cool, right?
Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty of that alarm stage. When your brain senses a threat, it doesn't just send one signal. Nope, it triggers 2 totally distinct pathways at pretty much the same time. It's a 2-pronged emergency response. And it all starts right up here. It doesn't matter if the threat is a bear in the woods or a nasty email from your boss. Your brain is command central. The perception of a threat is what kicks off this entire physiological cascade we're about to walk through.
All right, pathway number 1 is the fast one, the sympathetic nervous system, or SNS. You can think of this as your body's instant panic button. The brain sends a direct nerve signal, zap, right down to your adrenal glands, telling them to flood your system with hormones called catecholamines. The most famous one, of course, is adrenaline. This whole thing happens in a flash.
And boom, this is what that feels like. That flood of adrenaline creates the classic fight or flight response. Your heart starts pounding faster and harder. Your airways open up so you can suck in more oxygen. Your liver dumps a load of sugar, glucose, into your blood for instant energy, and blood gets rushed to your big muscles. You are physically primed for action. Now, at the very same time the SNS is firing off, a second, slightly slower system is getting warmed up, the HPA axis. Think of it like a hormonal chain of command. It starts in the brain's hypothalamus, which sends out hormone number 1. That tells the pituitary gland to release hormone number 2. And hormone 2 travels all the way down to the adrenal glands and tells them to release the main event, the big stress hormone, cortisol. It's a slower, more sustained way of response. So what's cortisol's job? Well, it makes sure there's plenty of fuel, glucose, available for your brain and muscles. To do that, it can actually break down your body's own protein and fat stores for energy. It also makes you more alert, sharpens your focus, and here's the really important part, file this away for later. In the short term, cortisol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. It's designed to get you through a crisis, not to stick around. So both of these pathways are absolutely brilliant, life-saving systems for short-term threats. But here's the million-dollar question. What happens when the stressor isn't a lion you escape from, but a 24/7 inbox that never, ever goes away? Well, this brings us to a really critical concept called allostatic overload. This diagram shows it perfectly. You got all these stressors, work, family, money, hitting your brain, which then triggers that response we just talked about. When that response is activated over and over and over again without a chance to recover, it creates what we call allostatic load. It's literally the cumulative wear and tear on your body and your brain. And right here, this is the tipping point. When that cumulative wear and tear, that allostatic load, gets to be too much, you enter allostatic overload. This is the critical moment where the very systems that evolved to save you, your adrenaline and cortisol, actually start to cause the damage that leads to disease. So let's get specific. How exactly does this overload cause something like high blood pressure or diabetes? Let's follow the chain of events from that chronic activation all the way to physical breakdown. This right here, this is the absolute linchpin of the whole process. Remember how I said to file away that short-term cortisol is anti-inflammatory? Well, when your body is just drenched in it for months or years, your cells actually become resistant to it. They just stop listening. And when that happens, you lose that protective anti-inflammatory shield. Instead, the constant stress activation promotes this persistent low-grade inflammation that just simmers away in your body day in and day out. And that chronic inflammation, it's now understood to be a major driver, a common root cause for a just staggering range of modern illnesses. It helps plaque build up in your arteries, it causes insulin resistance in your cells, and it's even linked to changes in the brain that can lead to depression. It's a really big deal. And hey, don't just take my word for it. As the source material says right here, the evidence is overwhelming. That constant elevated level of cortisol that defines chronic stress is directly, mechanistically linked to the development of these major disorders. The science is clear. Okay, so we've seen the whole problem from a trigger all the way to a disease. But the good news is that this is not an unstoppable train. So let's look at the solution, how we can actually interrupt this process and support our body's natural ability to bounce back. This visual just nails the goal. It's not about getting rid of stress completely. We actually need short bursts of good stress to perform well and to adapt. The whole key is to manage the duration and intensity. We want to minimize the bad chronic stress and really maximize the time we spend in recovery mode, letting our bodies repair and reset. So how do we do that? By actively working to lower our allostatic load. And the evidence points to a multi-pronged approach. You have your non-negotiables, lifestyle factors like sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Then there are the psychosocial buffers, things like your social connections and your mindset. And finally, you have specific activities like meditation or even just spending time in nature that actively turn on the body's relaxation response. And if you ever doubt just how much our environment and relationships matter, get this. A study found that people in hostile marital relationships who also had a history of mood disorders had inflammatory markers in their blood that were 79% higher than people in supportive relationships. 79%! And they even traced the mechanism. Chronic stress was linked to a leaky gut, which lets stuff into the bloodstream and triggers a massive immune response. That is a direct line from your social life to systemic inflammation.
So we've seen how a system that was beautifully designed to save your life from an immediate physical threat can be turned against you by the chronic psychological pressures of modern life. It's a brilliant adaptive system, but it just wasn't built for 24/7 activation. And that brings us to the final question, which isn't really about pathophysiology anymore. It's about you.